Hello and welcome to Chapter 10, Behavioral Factors in Cancer. Cancer is a group of diseases characterized by the presence of new cells that grow and spread beyond control. Cancer originates because of a change in a cell that we refer to as a mutation. This cell will continue to grow and reproduce in its mutated form, which results in a tumor. Any cell that is capable of dividing can transform into a cancer cell. So this includes all the different types of cells in our body, right? All these cells are continually dividing and can at any form mutate and turn into a cancer. This is even possible in plant cells. There are many different types of cancer cells, but the most common is where there's the presence of neoplastic tissue cells, which have nearly unlimited growth that robs the host of its nutrients. All true cancers share this characteristic of neoplastic growth. Neoplastic cells can be either benign or malignant. The difference between these two is that benign growths tend to remain localized, whereas malignant tumors spread easily and they can spread to secondary locations. So when a tumor is benign, although it can be problematic, it's typically going to stay in one place and be less threatening. When a tumor is malignant, it can destroy surrounding tissue and may move to the other parts of the body, which is referred to as it could metastasize, right? It can go into the bloodstream and spread to other sites. Malignant growths fall into four main groups. Carcinomas are cancers of the epithelial tissue that line the outer and inner surfaces of the body. So this is going to include our skin, our stomach lining, and all of our mucosous membranes. Sarcomas are cancers that arise in connective tissue. So in places like your bones, your cartilage, your muscles. Leukemias are cancers that originate in the blood or blood-forming cells. Right? So this is going to be your stem cells, your bone marrow, places like that. These three types of cancers account for about 95% of our malignant tumors. The fourth type is a lymphoma, which is a cancer of the lymphatic system, but this is going to be very rare. Cancer rates in the United States peaked in 1993 and have been declining since. One hypothesis for this decline in cancer rates was that our medical technology, right, our cutting-edge medicine has improved, thus we're increasing the lifespan of those with cancer and being able to cure malignant growths in some individuals, right, so that our medical technology is doing a better job helping prevent deaths from cancer. This would make sense if the incidence of cancer was the same, right? So if my number of new cases of cancer remained the same, but a smaller percentage died. However, the evidence doesn't actually support this theory because our incidence of cancer is actually declining as well, which better supports the idea that people are engaging in behaviors, right? They're taking preventative measures to not get cancer in the first place. We're going to talk about what some of these behaviors are in just a minute. When we look at different types of cancer, however, we see some unique patterns across our different types. So our cancers with the biggest decline are some of our most common cancers, lung cancer, breast cancer, prostate, colon cancer, right? These are our highest incidence, which accounts for the overall decline. However, some other cancers, including liver, melanoma, and esophageal, actually have increasing death rates. So when we say that people have lowered their behavioral risk overall, right, that this is going to be a contributor to our lower incidence of cancer, what does this mean? What are some of these behaviors that are actually related to cancer risk? First, and of course, we have smoking. As we discussed in Chapter 2, even though we haven't been able to do experiments on the issue of smoking and cancer, there's sufficient evidence that we can conclude a causal relationship, right? The link between cigarette smoking and lung cancer is just that strong. While lung cancer is, of course, the big one that we think of when we think of smoking, it's also been linked to a number of other cancers. So when you think of smoking, you breathe in all these chemicals into your lungs that are going to cause cancer, but these chemicals also get distributed throughout the body and are linked to a number of other cancers, especially including cancers of the larynx, the oral cavity, our sinuses, our pancreas, our liver, and our kidney. Right? So there's a number of other locations that where cancers have actually been linked to smoking. It was shown that about 25 to 40 years after smoking rates increased for men, lung cancer began to increase quickly, right? So it takes about 25 to 40 years for this lung cancer to appear in a smoker. So for this reason, we see this time lag, right? About 25 to 40 years after our smoking rate goes up, our lung cancer rate goes up. We also saw this with the decline in smoking rates. So one interesting thing is that the decline in smoking for men actually occurred before the decline in smoking for women, right? Men started smoking first and they stopped smoking first. So we saw this, right, this 25 to 40 year time lag where the smoking rates increased, the smoking rates increased, and then 25 years later the cancer rates increased. We saw this same decrease. For women, smoking rates have declined more gradually and more recently, so the lung cancer rate has declined more gradually, right? As we see this decline in women, over time we're going to see that their lung cancer rates go down in proportion to their smoking rate. Men who smoke are 23.3 times more likely to die of lung cancer than those who have never smoked, right? So this smoking is going to be the biggest risk factor that we have, our behavioral risk for cancer. Despite all the overwhelming evidence for the link between smoking and cancer, many smokers do not perceive that their behavior actually puts them at risk. Right? So this is called optimistic bias. The idea that even though someone is engaging in this behavior that's a huge risk factor, they're biased in that they don't think it's actually going to affect them. Right? For some reason, this behavior that's this huge risk factor isn't going to cause them to die. Another way that our behavior can affect our cancer risk is through our diet. This link is going to be a lot less clear, a lot less strong in terms of the research evidence than the link between smoking, but there's a number of ways in which diet can affect our cancer risk. There's a number of bacteria and fungi that have been related to stomach cancer. So our increase in our ability to refrigerate our food, right, and understand food safety, how to prevent our foods from growing bacteria, is likely related to the decline in stomach cancer. There's a number of food additives and preservatives, however, that have been linked in large quantities to cancer. So if we avoid food that's very processed, that's going to have a large amount of preservatives and things like that, then this will help us reduce or mitigate our risks of certain cancers. Additionally, studies have linked dietary fat as a risk for cancer, especially colon cancer. And this is going to be really strong when we look at saturated fat, right? So people who avoid saturated fat are going to decrease their risk for colon cancer. Some foods have been shown to protect against cancer. Again, our evidence is a little bit mixed. We don't have this strong, clear link like we do with smoking. But diets that are high in fruits and vegetables provide us a number of antioxidants that can help mitigate our cancer risk. Also, dietary fiber. Right? So if we eat enough fiber, this can help potentially prevent cancer. Our next behavioral risk factor is going to be alcohol. Alcohol does increase the risk for cancers of the mouth, the esophagus, breast, and liver. Because our liver plays the largest role in detoxifying our liver, right? It gets the alcohol out. People who are heavy drinkers, right? People who drink large quantities for a very long time, this can result in psoriasis of the liver, right? Which is a degenerative disease to this organ. So our biggest risk factor with alcohol is going to be damage to our liver. It's also been linked, as I just mentioned, to a number of other cancers, such as breast cancer. In the United States, they've shown only about 2% of breast cancer cases can be attributed to alcohol, right? So very small risk. But in countries where alcohol consumption is higher, such as Italy, it's potentially as high as 15% of breast cancer cases, right? So it's definitely some serious evidence that drinking alcohol can contribute to cancer beyond just our liver. Next, we have a sedentary lifestyle. Exercise has been shown to be preventative for cancer, right? People who live an active life have a lower cancer risk than those who live a sedentary lifestyle. This is going to especially include cancers of the colon, breast, lung, and pancreas. Next, we have UV light exposure. So exposure to ultraviolet light, which can come from the sun or from tanning beds, has been linked to melanoma, or a type of skin cancer. While this is problematic, it's important to note that not all sun exposure is going to be detrimental to us. Vitamin D, which is something that we can get from both the sun and from our diet, is essential to live. And it's hard to get enough vitamin D through just our diet alone. So a little bit of sun exposure is important so we can synthesize the chemicals that we need. But this is only maybe 10 to 15 minutes on exposed skin, right? So maybe if you go out in the sun a few times a week for just 15 minutes in shorts and a short sleeve shirt, you're going to get enough sun exposure. But people who continually expose themselves to the sun, right, things like tanning, going to tanning beds, which also have this UV light exposure, especially if not wearing sunscreen, this can drastically increase risk for melanoma. Lastly, sexual behaviors. Their cancers can result from AIDS, right? We talked about how AIDS lowers our immune system and opens us up to a number of different diseases. Having this lowered immune system, right, which AIDS is a sexually transmitted disease, this can increase our risk of cancer. Another way in which sexual behavior is linked to cancer is through HPV, or human papillomavirus. This is an STD that can increase risk of cancer, especially cervical cancer and oral cancer. So because of these two methods, right, two different ways in which cancer can be affected through STDs, individuals who have sex with many partners, especially women, are at a higher risk of cancer due to this increased risk of STDs. One other thing to note is that psychosocial factors, such as personality, have not been found to be associated with cancer. So it's often been proposed that there's a, quote, personality, right, that is prone to cancer. But there's been no evidence that this is actually that our personality can open us up as a risk factor for cancer.